here. Hi, everybody. This is Cindy, and normally I would say this is another episode of Spectrum Perspectives, but this is not your typical podcast that we're doing today. This is a Zoom call with a bunch of autism moms, and we have a special guest here today. Alexandra is here, and she's going to talk about S2C. Can you hear me, Patty? Are you trying to talk to me? Oh, okay. Which is spelling to communicate. I've had quite a few moms that their kids have learned how to communicate using rapid prompting method. S2C sounds similar. They use a spelling board, but I'd like to learn more about what it is. And Alexandra is also going to be opening up a center where she's going to open the doors for people to come and learn how to use this method to communicate. And there's also a movie coming out called Spellers. So we want to hear about that. So Alexandra, I don't want to take up too much time. I'm going to turn the floor over to you. And if you can just talk to us, tell us a little bit about you, your family, your kids, your experience with it, and tell us what it is and what your experience was with it.
Thank you so much.
And you know what, everybody else, if you could just mute so that it stays, I have it on speaker view, so I want it to be on Alexandra. So everybody just hit the mute button, please. Thanks.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you so much for having me on. Honestly, this has been life-changing for our family. Completely. I kind of used to live in a little bit of a depressing state because I have twins with autism. So it was kind of like, oh, what am I going to do? I have to do it double. I got married at 18. My husband was in the military. So we went overseas at 18, and that's where we gave birth to my twins. And then now I have two others. So I have four kids total, but my twins were diagnosed at 3 years old. And for the longest time, they were not communicating, termed nonverbal, which we now, I don't know if you've heard the term, the preferred term, which is non-speaker, because we now know that in Latin, nonverbal means without words, of which we realize that our children are certainly not without words. And so my twins are non-speakers, and I came to Spelling to Communicate in early 2020 from my friend JB Handley, who I called him up one day when I was in an ambulance with my son because he was having suspected seizures and I was worried. He was my go-to. So I called him, and he told me the most bizarre thing, to just speak to my son as if he understood everything and to just relax and to call him when I get out of the hospital because he has some exciting news. And I said, okay, really? But the mindset shift started that night in the hospital because I did what he said. And I said, this is the only way that I'm going to get through this hospital stay. And so then when I gave him a call, once we were out, he said that he was doing Spelling to Communicate, this new therapy, with his son, Jamie, who was 17 at the time. And for all I knew, he was non-communicative and nonverbal. And he was saying that he was communicating for the first time and it was life-changing. So he sent me a video of his son doing spelling on 3 stencil boards, and I was sold. And then I brought my twins down to Virginia to Elizabeth Bossler, who has a center, Growing Kids Therapy Center, and we started there. And we started when they were 8 years old, and now they're 11 years old and openly communicating with their letter boards. And our entire family dynamic has changed. I am able to communicate with them and know when their head is hurting or what they're feeling. I now realize that autism is not a cognitive disorder. I have an understanding that it's sensory motor differences and that apraxia plays a huge role in our kids and that they can't control their bodies. And so they wake up and go to sleep every night just trying to manage their bodies in impossible ways for them. And so with Spelling to Communicate, you are developing those motor skills necessary to take the fine motor of speech to communicate through a gross motor function. And with that, it also helps in all aspects of life because you're now doing purposeful motor and you're building up the motor skills necessary for activities of daily living. And with that comes, you look beyond behaviors and you find ways to co-regulate and regulate. And it just changes everything, honestly, for autism. And I'm so sorry for the background noise.
Okay, we're all moms. How old are the twins now?
They just turned 11.
Oh, they are. Okay. And so how old were they when you started this?
8 years old.
Okay, because you
And
said they were diagnosed when they were 3, so they were 8. Okay.
And so I also, so it took them, they only became openly speaking in July.
Of this past year.
Yes. And
You mean, so they speak verbally now?
no.
Oh.
They're fully communicative with their letterboards.
With their letterboards. Okay, got it.
One son has unreliable speech, so he will sing songs, but it's unreliable in a communication sense. And one son is a little bit more advanced on his letterboards than the other for now. But yeah, it's really, since July, it's been a journey where we're now learning so much about each other.
Hey, if
And
everybody else can just mute, please, so that we can just stay on speaker view. Thanks. Go ahead.
And I did have a baby in between, so we kind of had a kink in our progress when we started at 8 years old, got pregnant, had a baby. So we kind of had like a little lull there, but then once we hopped back on, it was great.
So, so where did you go to learn this? Or did somebody come to the house? You went to a center, like you went, how did this happen?
So I feel like I'm kind of a unique situation because I went to Virginia to Elizabeth Fossler, the creator of Spelling to Communicate, at her center, and I did out of town appointments. So I went there and we stayed over, we had 2 appointments each day per child. And then I would go home and work on it. And typically in a clinical setting, the perfect case scenario would be have a practitioner, meet with that practitioner weekly. The practitioner will work with your child to build up those skills. And then typically the practitioner gets your child open first. And because there was no practitioners in New Jersey, I relied on these out-of-town appointments, and I was not able to go frequently. So I would go, and then 6 months later, try and assess my progress. So in that process, I did a lot of things wrong. I still didn't understand the skill progression of things. I think I did a lot of things wrong. I wasn't holding the letterboard in the most supportive position for my boys to build up those motor skills. And when I finally learned the proper board placement, I was shocked that I had been doing it wrong for so long. So I learned the hard way, but also, and then I had started to drive about 2 hours to see a practitioner in New York. And so that ended up being a 4-hour drive, and it just wasn't working because by the time that we got there, there was so much dysregulation. There was no way they were going to sit down and get into a lesson. We tried it for a few weeks and it just wasn't going to work out. And I felt so defeated because there was just nothing here in this state. And so then I decided, I have to figure out a way to bring this here. And I didn't think that I would ever be a practitioner, but I homeschooled for 2 years, and it was the best experience ever. And then when I put the boys back into school after I had the baby, I I had requested spelling to communicate in the school, of which they have denied us. And we've been fighting, ever since. But at that time, they weren't open when we first requested. But I was desperate. I was seeking someone to help me do this because as a mom of 4 kids, I can't multitask. I can't.
Wait, what do you mean they weren't open? They weren't open to the suggestion, or the school wasn't open? Because I'm doing the math because they're 11 and they were 8. So the past 3 years, this is COVID time.
So when they started at 8 years old,
Mhm.
we were homeschooling. So it was this beautiful period where I was homeschooling during COVID, had completely pulled them from the school system, no virtual, nothing. I was just unschooling essentially. Then I had the baby, and then I put them back into school. So then once I put them back into school, they were not openly communicating on their boards. So we were still working on the skill progression. And so when I requested spelling to communicate, I was requesting it for them to basically be the practitioner, which, it
But they
doesn't
weren't
work.
trained. They knew
Right,
nothing about
right.
it. Right.
But now that they are openly communicating, and they're still being denied. But the school was able to actually see the entire skill progression. So they saw when they were on the 3 stencil boards, and now they see them on the full stencil boards. And so then when they had an AAC evaluation for an AAC device, the twins were whisked away behind closed doors, and I felt a pit in my stomach. Like, this is not going to work out very well. And sure enough, the entire evaluation didn't go very well. My one son freaked out on the evaluator, and I just had tears in my eyes in the waiting room. And I got an acceptance email into the practitioner training course, of which I had just only applied just because I thought, hey, why not? Let's see what I can do with this. But that was the moment I knew that I had to build what we needed. I can no longer fight. I need to build it. And so I started that journey, and everything since then has been so divine, because there's a special ed teacher who would have been their teacher, but she had triplets and she never returned from maternity leave. And she is now joining me at my practice, and she works with my boys weekly. So that has been tremendously helpful. So now
She works with them at their school or on their own, like after school?
On their own. I pull them from school. They don't even need to be in school. I keep them home a couple days and then I send them in. But she works with them, and she's been getting them to be even more fluent on the boards. And then now we have 2 practitioners at our clinic that will be opening up. And she was a part of the school system, and she's just a huge, tremendous help too.
So tell us about your facility that you're opening up.
So we're going to be opening up a spelling to communicate clinic in Vernon, New Jersey, and it's in the same town where my boys were denied, which is, I think, the best part. And I think that the more, my number one client right now is their classmate that I work with weekly and have been for the past 7 months, and she recently became open. So I'm finding so much joy from creating.
Wait, what does that mean? What do you mean she became open?
Okay, so there's this skill progression that happens when you do spelling to communicate. You first start out with, the way that you do it is that you have lessons and you reading age appropriate material. And then when you are asking the child questions, you start off with spell questions and known questions, which are essentially questions from the reading material that the answer was already in there. So you're presuming competence, you read the lesson to the child, and you believe that they understood what you just read and can relay that back to you. And so you practice the motor skills by focusing on those questions first. And then
for example, would you do like a yes or no question, or are you expecting them to spell something out right from the beginning?
So you typically don't do choice questions. You typically just start off with spell or known questions. So you would ask, what was the elephant's name that we talked about today? and then the elephant's name. But then you can move on to semi-open questions once you gain those skills, and you're now on the 26 letter board, because you do start on 3 stencil boards with only a few letters. And you need to be able to, as a communication regulation partner, you need to be able to know which letter board to put down for the known questions. So for those, the answer. And then you can progress to the 26 letter board, which has 26 letters of the alphabet. And then you can start to open it up to semi-open. So maybe there's more than one answer, but it is in the reading material that you just provided the child. And then from there, once the child accuracy increases, then you move up to those prior knowledge questions, which could be something that they've learned before and are able to articulate, but maybe it wasn't in the lesson. And then from there, you move to open questions. And when a child becomes open, that means that they are expressing themselves and their thoughts and their feelings, and it has nothing to do with the communication regulation partner. It's all their thoughts and feelings. So for the past 7 months, I've been working with the client, my boy's classmate, to just do those known spell questions and work on semi-open questions. And she just recently became open, meaning she was finally able to express herself for the first time.
Got it. Okay, I think let me open this up before we talk about the movie. Well, let's talk about the movie. So the movie's called Spellers, right? And you didn't have anything to do with the production. I guess you're just promoting it.
So yes,
it's private screenings and just in a couple of theaters, right?
Yes, it is actually been accepted into the Phoenix Film Festival. So that's why we're all having private screenings of it, so that it can have its time at the Phoenix Film Festival. I have nothing to do with the production, but JB Hanley is the reason why we got into Spelling to Communicate. Him and his son, their story is just incredible. The film is based on a book that they wrote together, father and son, called Underestimated. And it's inspired by that book, but then it also showcases 8 spellers' stories with different methods of spelling and their family's journeys coming to this. And it's just absolutely mind-blowing. I've seen the movie twice now, and it's just so heartwarming, touching, and no one will walk away from this film and not have a different perspective of
Can you cry?
Oh, yes, we're gonna need like Costco tissues.
Okay, yeah, because there's a few of us that we've already got our tickets. We're going to go up to Rockaway, and I think someone else is going to go. There's one down near Princeton somewhere, I think.
There's also one in Paramus too, if anyone is closer.
Yeah, that's further up north. Yeah. I just think Paramus Mall. I want to open this up to questions. I don't want to be the only one asking questions. Does anybody, you guys can just unmute yourself if anybody has a question that you want to ask her, if you would like to know some more detail. Does anybody have anybody else out there have some non-speakers out there that think that they would want to try something like this? And Houston, Katie and Houston are on with us today too. So Houston, we want to hear from you if there's anything that you want to say about your journey.
So where would you, this is Joanne Frusciano, where would you begin once you meet an individual that is nonverbal, non-speaking? How do you begin with that individual in a lesson?
Okay, so it was mind-blowing for me when my boys were 8 years old and I took them to Elizabeth, and we walked in. She said, "Hi, my name's Elizabeth. I'm going to be working with you today." And she spelled her name. And then she showed them how she put down the letter boards and told them to poke to the letters of her name. And so I would follow in her footsteps too. And I would just introduce myself. I would presume competence. I would presume that the child is listening to me and understands what I'm saying. And wants to feel heard. And then I would just introduce a lesson and say, listen, this is what we're going to be working on. It might feel weird at first. It's going to be new, but I want to work on developing these motor skills and age appropriate material and work together to do this. And we would do about an hour session and then meet again and go from there. I hope that answers.
Some
Yes.
of them don't have the motor skills right away. It's something that needs to be developed. I know one of the moms I had interviewed and her son learned to communicate with RPM, and Katie knows, she wrote Josiah's Fire. Yeah. So her first lesson was she read him a Bible story and said, she read a story about how Jesus healed the blind man, and she said, and she just wrote the word on 2 pieces of paper, and she said, Josiah, did he play with the blind man or did he heal the blind man? And all he had to do was slap the piece of paper. Like that was the very first lesson.
Can I speak to that a little
Yeah,
bit?
go ahead.
There are some differences.
Use
There
Tim
are
wants to
some
talk to us.
differences between how you begin, and let me say, there are some differences between RPM and S2C. The most significant being how you begin developing motor skills. S2C typically expects a higher level of motor control when they first start off, because they really want them in that independent, they're really pushing independence from the beginning. RPM gives a little bit more freedom to those with difficult motor control whose bodies just have a harder time being still. Either way, both methods can be done with any individual. What Houston just spelled, and just so you know, like I learned S2C. That's how we started out, was with S2C. But I have nothing but respect for anyone using gross motor to teach our kids to develop a way to communicate. What Houston spelled was continue to raise awareness. All autistics can use motor, gross motor, to communicate. You just have to keep working on it. And that was his message.
Right now?
Literally just now on the board.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Houston. I love that so much. And you know what? I think too, when you start with children who are younger and you actually work on that motor, how many possibilities does that open up for these children?
I definitely would love for more younger kids to have that opportunity to communicate earlier, so they do not experience as much of the trauma of being trapped in their body for decades. That is when they go so long with no voice, the emotional trauma that they have to heal from is so significant that actually hinders their progress.
I agree. And my boys are only 11 years old, but the amount of trauma that they have at 11, it should never happen. It should never be
And
happening.
Houston didn't communicate until he was almost 22, and that was a lot of trauma.
Oh, Houston, you are a trooper, man. You are an inspiration.
Alexandra, you just posted today about your one son came home and he went right to sleep, and then the other one said you have no idea what we go through during the day, right?
Yep. And these are things I'm hearing more and more. Yesterday, my son, who fell asleep when he came home, he said his day was so challenging. And so I should have known better today, but I asked anyways. And, you know, it's hard for me to just wrap my head around. One thing that happened the other day too, is that, so I have a almost 18-month-old. And so my one son, he pushed her the other day, and I was like, you know what? I'm also learning about beyond behaviors. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Mona Delahook. She's great. I love her stuff. But I took one of her courses because I really wanted to understand behaviors. And so instead of just assuming that my son meant to do that, I asked him, I said, you know what, let me give him an opportunity to tell me why he just did that. And so he spelled to me, I didn't mean to, my body just does it. And I said, is there ever a time that you push her on purpose? And he said, no. And I asked him, why do you laugh after? And he spelled, I get really nervous. And I was like, oh my goodness, because now that changes how I should approach this. Instead of like a compliance approach, I need to approach this differently and actually, cater to that. I did ask him, I said, is there ever a time where you push your brother on purpose? And he spelled yes. So, and when I asked him, I said, why? When do you do that? He goes, when he is disrespectful. And I was like, okay, well, so now I'm getting a deeper understanding of what's happening and how I can actually better assist. But I think of, there's got to be so much trauma too that happens in the school systems when these behaviorists and therapists and teachers are treating it as if it's a behavior, but instead these kids can't control their bodies. They have impulsivity and a lot of dysregulation that impacts their body's ability to manage. And that, it then, I believe this shifts spelling to communicate from more than just a communication method. It's an entire learning style. You have to shift your entire mindset to understand what autism is compared to, what we previously thought.
Right. And Katie, you're very good at explaining that to everyone too, about how the whole mind-body disconnect, but how they can't control their bodies, and a lot of things that are always getting labeled as behaviors are really not. It's like their bodies are doing something that they have no control over. Katie, can you talk about that? You're muted, babe.
I'm so sorry. My other son was talking to me and I didn't hear what you asked.
Oh, we were talking about, she was saying about how her son, pushed the baby down, but he doesn't really mean to do it. And he said, my body just does it. And I didn't mean to do it. And I said, you address that quite a bit, of things that get labeled as behaviors that are not really behaviors. It's the whole, they don't have control over what their bodies do.
That's correct. Houston, in fact, I asked him when I was first
read the book.
learning.
I haven't read your book.
When I was first learning about it, I asked him, I said, everyone else is saying that they can't, that their body won't do what they ask them to do. And I said, do you agree? He said, yes, that's exactly what's going on. And what people don't understand is the different types of motor. There's motor initiation, there's motor continuation, but there's also impulsive motor. There's motor that you're continuing a motion and you need to stop the motor and then restart. That's another type. But the impulsive motor, they can't stop. And they literally don't, if you don't have the ability to start and stop motor, then you have no way to stop an impulsive motor.
And with that too, there's we then shift a focus to practicing working on that inhibition. So, when a child or student is openly communicating, you can then do trial runs where you put two items down on a table and ask them which one they want to pick up, and you can work on initiation, or you could work on not touching it. So you put a very desirable item that they would usually reach for, and you say, okay, we're going to work on not grabbing this. And then you build up that tolerance for inhibition. And I think that's extremely important, especially when you're dealing with like elopement. I have both my twins elope a lot. And so we've been going for walks, and we're working on freeze your body, because that on-demand motor task is so hard for them to do. But when you do build up that motor skill with everything, in addition to spelling, then they can really work on those activities of daily living to be able to function and be independent and autonomous.
Yeah, I had a runner too. Had an eloper. Yeah. When you went for training to do this, did you do this? Is this something you did online? Did you have to go to classes? Like, if anybody else decides they would like to, I've got some teachers that I keep telling them, you should learn how to do this, learn how to be an RPM instructor or an S2C. Like, how would they go about doing something like that?
My training was mostly online with a 5-day in-person internship. And it's pretty intensive, I would say, because it felt like a college course to me. And they really care very much about how you are interacting with your clients, because they want to make sure that you have the best intentions. And so I would work with clients, take footage and send it to my teachers. They would assess my skills and make sure that I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing, and building up the skills that I need. And then with the 5-day in-person internship, that's really where it's at too.
Did you have to go to Virginia to do that?
Yes, I'm actually going next week. So I'm not completely done yet, but I am going next week. And but I'm also familiar with the facility, because that's where I would take my twins. So I'm actually excited to be going there on the different angle this time.
How did you do that with 4 kids? How'd you go down to Virginia for a couple of days? Would you go down and stay in a hotel for a couple of days? And that just totally messes up their whole routine.
Well, we're actually all going next week, but we camp. We have a trailer, and so my twins have the bunk beds, my little two,
Okay.
and we
Got it.
woods people.
Got it. Well, that's a little bit more familiar to them, though.
Yes. So we've got our stable place to go, and
Got it.
hopefully my husband survives.
Who else has questions?
I do. So my son only has use of one hand because he had a stroke in utero and he has right-sided weakness. So would he need to use both hands in order to do this? No? Okay.
So and so I'm assuming that he uses that one hand for all other things, feeding, and yeah,
Yes.
so you would just build upon that. You would just build upon that one hand.
So the fact that he's had that, that he's been using that hand for so long means the motor pathways are highly developed for that hand. So that would actually be the better hand for him anyway, because when he went and developed through all those neurological stages, that was the part of his body that the motor neurons were actually connecting to.
Correct. Yeah. So I just didn't know if this was something that specifically needed 2 hands in order to be able to communicate this way, but it sounds like it doesn't need that. Okay.
Basically, what they're doing, which we saw Houston do, is they point to the letters on the letterboard. The progression after that, I think, becomes typing. But again, you can type with one hand, I know with RPM anyway, I've learned that. Who else? Anyone? Anyone? No? Houston, anything else you want to say to us tonight?
Yes. How many of your children are non-speakers? How many of everybody else?
I
Hold
have
on, let me put this on, I'm gonna put this on gallery view so I can see. So you have two, you have one.
My daughter does the communication to RPM.
Oh, she
And
does.
so, yes, she's been doing it since she's been, she's 14, she's 20, she'll be 21 next month. So we started when she was 14. We did the RPM, through, Manisha Ladd Corporation. They
Yes.
did they did training classes.
Yeah,
with
I
the two
interviewed Manisha
practitioners.
too. Yeah,
Yes, I know Manisha for many years, so she's always done training classes for parents with the RPM practitioners. They would come and do like a 3-day course, and you bring your child in. They would train her and then train the parent. So you would go like twice a week, like whatever they have. And that's how we learned with Tiffany to communicate. So it was really very mind blowing because it opened up
That's
her
awesome.
words and everything. And now we actually do it with spelling to communicate because it was hard to find a practitioner because she does it with me, but I want her to learn how to communicate with other people. But it's important in the future. So we do go to Crimson Rise in Staten Island, and they were trained by S2C Elizabeth's Corporation, Growing Kids Therapy, and they're very good. They do group socialization. They do classes there like for an hour on Saturdays, and it's really nice. Tiffy really enjoys it. They do geometry class and all different things, and they're really good with her. So she's starting to really enjoy it now. So
good. So she's 21, so she's out of school.
not yet. She's going to have an extra year of school. So
Oh, good. Okay.
yeah. They don't do it with her in school, but I've had taught her how to communicate, and she tells me everything, what goes on in school, how she's feeling, and like different things like that. But the educational part, she does love learning more. She gets frustrated with herself at school because she knows so much, and she loves math and reading and poetry. She wrote beautiful poetry, and so but she's really, she loves doing that. So I'm really glad we found it, though. It's important. So
I will tell you, I am working very hard at making this into the school system. I am working very hard to make sure that our kids have access to this, because even though I'm building a clinic, and my clinic will be somewhat like Crimson Rise too, we want to foster those friendships and relationships, but all non-speakers need to have access to this. So not everyone can afford sessions. This needs to be implemented in the schools. This needs to be normal. And so I'm working very hard. I'm going to be sending the film spellers to every single legislator in this state. And then we also have Dr. Elizabeth Torres from Rutgers, who is a professor and researcher, and she does all the research on sensory motor differences. And she's going to be a huge proponent she's a huge proponent of spelling to communicate and RPM and all these methods of communication, because at the end of the day, our kids need methods of communication. No matter what method it is used, we need to understand that our children are in there. They need to have access to communication, and then we need to shift the focus to focusing on the motor. Hugely.
So why do you need to send it to legislators? It's not allowed in the schools, or what's the issue?
So with my situation, they have not given me prior written notice of denial, but they verbally expressed that it's not state approved, whatever that means. Can't find anything on it, but ultimately, I think that legislators can help us so that we can access this. We need access to it first and foremost.
Yeah, the only thing that I could think of that's similar to that is ABA therapy had to get approved by the state, I think, so that the insurance could cover it, right? So it's making legislators aware of basically what you need, well, and to not stand in the way.
So what I would also say too is that I believe that this method is also conflicting with ABA. So it contradicts each other. And that might be another reason why they don't want this into the school systems.
Yeah, but I think the parents should be the ones deciding what method. I just me personally, I try anything, whatever works. Every kid is different, so whatever works for them, well, why not do it? Try at least.
Their
but
big
I don't understand
argument
why they
is
get in the
we
way.
will only do things that have that are data driven and proven therapies. ABA has lots of data. It doesn't prove anything. But because there's limited research and nothing that proves that it's them, their argument is we don't know if it's them communicating or the facilitator. And the reality is, because of their need for motor coaching, they have to have a facilitator. They just do. And that is a physical and neurological need that the school systems have to recognize. And we're not there yet at getting them to recognize because they actually don't understand what apraxia truly is. So therefore, they're not providing. It's literally like having a student who's blind and demanding that they see. It's literally that much of a block as to what they are allowing for services.
Right.
Well, I also, I thought about this the other day too, because I've been dealing with the IEP team, and, there's just this blockage, and we need to rehumanize it. We absolutely need to rehumanize this, because the other day I was in an IEP meeting and I was telling them that, my boys are struggling because they don't have access to general curriculum and the long-term goal of, an academic high school diploma. And one of the IEP team members spoke up and said, "Oh, but he has a method of communication. We gave him the Go Talk Now app." And I'm like, it's so limited. Where are we going to say that is enough? Because put yourself in the child's shoes, and we're talking about children here. As an adult, we need to put ourselves in their shoes and say, okay, what is it like to have limited communication? Because as adults, we struggle with communication already, right? We have communication problems with our significant others or family members, and oftentimes we can't communicate or express ourselves well enough, and that's why we get into arguments and this and that. Well, think about a child who has an app with just a few words on it or just a few pecks. We're telling that child that it's enough. How can we just assume that child can regulate him or herself with that? How is that enough? We need to rehumanize it and put ourselves in the child's shoes and think to ourselves, what nurtured us as a child? What did we feel? What did we need from an adult at this moment in time, especially when they have these extreme needs that need to be met and we can support them? So
Oh, you froze. You're frozen. We lost you there. You froze there for that last sentence.
Yeah, it's just bizarre, some of the things that come out of these educators' mouths.
I have a question, Cindy.
Go ahead.
Okay, Miriam Matthias here. All right, does it work on everyone and age? And what has been the oldest child or adult that has tried this RPM?
Houston actually, what he said earlier actually answers this question, but he said every autistic that this is their way to open their mind, and all they need is an alphabet and a finger.
Hmm.
And there is no limit for age. What we have to understand is this is completely a motor block. So that's basically saying how old before you can help someone's motor. They can be any age to help someone's motor. Does it help if they're younger? Yes, but we don't stop having an ability to develop motor skills just because of age.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure.
I would just add that too, you know, the earlier you start, the better. I think the more challenging. I think that typically you can start with a 5-year-old, but that's what you call like the littles, because they're still hugely dysregulated. They're still figuring out their world. But I think 5 is like the standard age that you can begin it. And I think that if everyone started at 5, we'd see some huge progress. It just might take a little bit more time with the littles and a little bit more regulating to get them there.
Like my son, he's 31, so that's why I was just wondering, like, you know, like an age, and does it work for everyone? Have you seen anyone that it hasn't worked for?
I don't know anyone who it hasn't worked for, except for the parents who don't put the effort in and don't do the work and stop.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the parents have to do a lot of work too.
It is hard. I think that the challenge is not talked about enough. I really struggled getting my boys there because it was just me, because I didn't have a local practitioner. I had to do this every single day. I was doing lessons, even if it was just 10 minutes, I was working with them, and dysregulation happens. And then if I'm dysregulated, they're dysregulated. And then if I'm not, you know, present, then how can I expect them to be present? So there's a growth that has to happen where, I don't know, I've learned so much where now I'm able to cope with my own thoughts and feelings. And I feel like it's been healing and, you know, cathartic for me to go through that process. But it's definitely a challenge. And there have been days where I have had to just put the boards down and say, I'm not able to do this today. I am just not in a good headspace to give you a lesson today.
What Houston tells every single parent that asks him this exact question is, the most important thing is belief. You have to believe in your son. You have to believe this will work, because your doubt literally triggers their anxiety, which basically cuts off motor control.
Interesting, right? And remember that Houston can hear your thoughts. So yeah. And even if they can't hear the thoughts, they pick up on your emotion. They feel it, they sense it. Yeah. Yeah. So you have to, you know, you know what? Go see the movie. We'll all go see the movie. and that will hopefully, you know, spark something in you to say, all right, you know what? Let's try this. Let's do this. You know, it can't hurt to try. That's just how I feel, you know. I keep saying, I wish I knew about this 10 years ago. It's too late for me. You know, I wish that I could have tried this with my son, and it's too late for me, but it's not too late for any of you. I don't care how old your son is, or daughter. I would love to see everybody just try and see if we got some miracles in the group.
And how would we get started to learn about it? Is there like a specific website, or, you know, I'm actually a retired special ed teacher, and I would be very interested in learning how to do this so I can help my son and many others. I would love to learn how to do this. You know, it just sounds like incredible.
It is. And I actually think that there's a growing body of ways to learn this. there's, you know, the S2C training program, there's RPM training, there's communication regulation partner training. Before I became an S2C practitioner, I took a parent cohort, which I felt was really helpful. I was in a support group. It was a Zoom with other moms doing S2C2, and we kind of just passed information back to each other, and it was guided by one of the S2C practitioners from Growing Kids Therapy. So that was something that really benefited us. And then there's just what I love is that there's so many options now. There's just a growing body of ways to do this. And I think you should start with finding a practitioner with whichever method you decide to go for.
And, you know, there's the associated with spellers are some S2C practitioners who've gone off on their own, and they're basically trying to incorporate a lot of these different methods. And the big thing is to realize there's not like one superior than the other. What I see is if you judge the best approach on the motor skills of the person who needs to communicate. So let that be what helps you make your decision. And don't feel like you're limited to only that. If you see a technique in another approach that you think would apply to your child or your client or whoever you're working with, by all means use it. I use multiple skills depending on the individual I'm working with.
Okay.
Wait, Katie, are you teaching this now?
Oh, I have been, but I just don't take on anymore because I just can't. Houston's in school, I'm working full time, and I was trying to squeeze kids in before work, after work, and I can't really do it anymore.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wait, what are you doing? No.
Yeah. But I do have good news. One of the little ones that I was working with, a 14-year-old girl, she became completely open and fluent, and that was just. And the mom had come to me, and she's like, "No, she's like all her tests. They say she's, you know, just like 4 years old. She can't learn. She doesn't know anything." And I'm like, "She already knows. I promise you. How am I supposed to?" She was just like so resistant, and she called me up, and she's like, you told me she knew." And she was crying, and it's the truth. These kids have been teaching themselves their entire lives. And I say kids, and that's actually only some of them, because some of these individuals are adults and they've been teaching themselves their entire lives. And I want to honor those incredible human beings who are completely competent adults, but just lack the motor skills to communicate and show what they understand and know.
Yeah, we're on that Lemonade page, right, on Facebook. So between Katie and Alexandra, if they've got information, you could just post it on that page too. I invited Manisha. She's on the page now also. She teaches RPM. That's the one that Debbie said that she taught her daughter. If you saw the video that I showed of that Saturday morning of several of the moms that all use the RPM, she was the one where the teacher tried to say, "Oh, well, he knows that." She says, "Oh, but he doesn't know that." And she's like, "No, he knows." And she's like, "No, but he doesn't know that." She's like, "No, he knows." That was Manisha. So she's very, she's a good resource too. Like I can tag her on a post and we can ask her, you know.
And she has a foundation. Akil is
Akil,
amazing.
yes,
And she has a foundation for him. And you know, to really get in
soon too, right, Katie?
Say that again.
I believe she's opening up her clinic soon too.
Yeah,
I think so.
yes, she is. With a Seiko,
she's got a training. She's got a
Yeah.
training coming up. She sent me the link to it.
Yeah, it has a symposium or something.
Yeah. So all of these things that are being offered, take advantage of them. Like I know it might have seemed like for a long time there weren't any resources, but your community is really starting to explode with some people who have really great training and resources. And this is a community effort. There is not a single person that's going to be able to address the massiveness of the need. And so everybody needs to work together and just love each other and help each other and believe in each other's kids, and listen to the problems and the issues and help problem solve and cry and love each other.
I agree. I feel like there's so many good things happening. I feel like there's a massive shift occurring, and I just feel it deep down in my soul that this is finally happening. And it, spelling as a method of communication has been around for 50 plus years. I learned this because of our mutual friend, Arthur. And it's been around. It's been around. And we're finally at the climax.
Arthur has been fighting this fight for at least 30 years alone. Everybody tried to shut him up, tried to shut these other parents up, and they were successful. And he has been fighting this fight alone. And it's absolutely incredible the amount of just bravery and perseverance that he has maintained, and belief that this would come out and it would be known. And my whole thing about like the telepathy part, like we have to tell the truth about that. We can't hide that fact. It is part of it. There's this shared we don't really know if they're using our eyes, or if they're using our neurology sometimes, or if it's just this massive amount of energy that's coming at them. But we can't be afraid of the truth. We have to tell the truth, and we have to, what really has to change is our expectations of testing everything. We have to just be open. And as far as education should just be offered freely. Let's stop trying to test everything and prove everything, and just give it freely like it's supposed to be given.
No. All right, anybody else? Before we sign off, anybody else have any other questions or comments? No? Okay, I did want to mention to all you New Jersey moms that I did book the event down the shore, down at Tom's River, for August 15th to the 17th. It's a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you guys are interested in going to that, email me at the what is it Autism Retreat 2021 at Gmail, whatever we've been using for the other retreat, so that I can get an idea of how many people want to come, to make better plans about how many rooms to reserve and all that. So I'll be posting about that on the page. I did send an email out. Nobody replied to the email because I didn't say to reply to the email. But I know that there were a bunch of people that said that they wanted to go. So I need to create a list now of names. So, okay.
Cindy, a quick question about your retreat down the shore. You said it's 35 per person, and are you talking the children too? Because a lot of people that I've spoke to didn't know if you were counting the kids in on that 35, or like if it was for just adults or each person in the family.
Hold on, let me turn off the recording first, okay? Let's just end this video, and then we'll talk more about that, okay? Okay.